Khamenei's funeral pauses the shooting, but Hormuz and the nuclear talks don't wait for a burial. If you're catching up, the U.S.-Iran track has moved from Qatari-mediated talks to a 14-point memorandum of understanding, a framework that commits both sides to end military operations, negotiate a final deal within 60 days, reopen Hormuz, and move towards sanctions relief. How any of that actually gets implemented? Still unresolved.
This is Iran War Daily. Geneva says progress, Tehran slapping tolls on the Strait, and 2 Brits are starving in a cell. Let's untangle what's real and what's theater.
We start in Geneva, Arakchi's exact words, and what the phrase guiding principles does and doesn't mean.
We're staying on U.S.-Iran deal negotiations. Follow the show, and you won't miss what comes next.
Gulf News with Lakshmi Pavithran, Balaram Menon, Jay Hilotin.
Huge crowds gathered in Tehran for the funeral ceremonies of Iran's late supreme leader Ali Khamenei, killed in a U.S.-Israeli strike on February 28th. U.S. President Donald Trump said both sides would avoid any hostilities during the proceedings, adding that talks with Iran would continue after the ceremonies.
Huge crowds in Tehran today at the Grand Mosala for Khamenei's funeral. He was killed, per Gulf News, in that U.S.-Israeli strike on February 28th. Trump says both sides are holding fire through the rights, and talks continue after.
A ceasefire for a funeral. Meanwhile, Gulf News reports ships turning back in Hormuz right now, and Iran's charging transit fees with a friendly nation's leniency tier. So the guns are quiet and the toll booth is open.
2 tracks here, and note who's on each. Netanyahu says he spoke with Trump about a future meeting in the U.S., while the maritime disruption keeps building. The morning is the headline, the fee schedule is the policy.
And nobody in that Gulf News piece gives a number. Who qualifies as friendly? What's the per-barrel charge? Which underwriter is pricing that discretionary risk? Trump urges restraint. Restraint doesn't reroute a tanker.
This one's from DD News.
Iran and the United States reached an understanding on Tuesday on main guiding principles in talks aimed at resolving their long-standing nuclear dispute. But that does not mean a deal is imminent, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said.
Araghchi's wording out of Geneva, per DD News, an understanding on, quote, guiding principles, but he explicitly said a deal is not imminent. He's putting language on the table and managing expectations in the same breath.
Guiding principles. And a U.S. official, unnamed naturally, says Iran will bring detailed proposals in the next 2 weeks. So the substance is still a promissory note.
The mediation matters here. This was indirect, with Witkoff and Kushner on one side, Araghchi on the other, and Oman's Badr al-Busaidi carrying it. And al-Busaidi's own read was, quote, much work is yet to be done.
Here's the tell for me. Brent fell more than 1% the second Araghchi opened his mouth. The market priced this as marginally real, but it's pricing guiding principles, not assigned anything.
And notice who stayed quiet. The White House didn't respond to questions on the meeting. So, on the record, we have Tehran's characterization and one anonymous U.S. official. That's the whole confirmed picture. From the Arabian Stories.
Washington. The talks followed the signing of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding on June 18th, which set out a 60-day framework for Washington and Tehran to negotiate a broader agreement covering Iran's nuclear program, sanctions relief, maritime security, and regional de-escalation. According to diplomatic sources quoted by Dawn, Pakistan and Qatar are continuing to mediate the process, with Islamabad emerging as the most likely venue for the next round of technical discussions.
Following up on that MOU track, negotiators now have a likely date. The Arabian Stories, citing Dawn, puts the next technical round on July 11th in Islamabad, with Pakistan and Qatar still mediating. The venue isn't locked. Switzerland's Bergenstock is still in the mix. And this is being framed as technical level, not the political round, per those diplomatic sources.
Technical level. So the July 11 meeting sorts the plumbing while the June 18 MOU's 60-day clock keeps ticking, which means we're, already deep into that window before anyone touches the hard files?
Right. The MOU set out nuclear, sanctions relief, maritime security, regional de-escalation. Islamabad on the 11th doesn't settle all four. It just means the process survived Khamenei's funeral ceremonies.
And the burials run through July 9 in Mashhad. So mediators are penciling in around 2 days after the final burial. That's an optimistic calendar for a state still in official mourning.
This one's from Deccan Chronicle.
Iran has criticized the U.S.-led CENTCOM security summit in Bahrain, rejecting Washington's role in safeguarding the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, has convened a landmark regional security conference in Bahrain, bringing together military leaders from 12 nations, including unprecedented participation from Syria and Lebanon.
So Arakchi's in Geneva talking guiding principles one day, and the next he's on Twitter asking whether CENTCOM brought security or insecurity to the region. Pick a lane.
That's Arakchi's July 2 post, per Deccan Chronicle. And note the summit's actual makeup. 12 nations in Manama, hosted by the Bahrain Defense Force, with Syria and Lebanon in the room for the first time. That lineup didn't exist before the war.
Syria and Lebanon under a U.S. air defense umbrella? That's the thing Tehran cannot swallow. Washington's building a Hormuz security architecture on one track, while Arakchi's shaking hands in Geneva on another. Somebody authorized both.
And Iran's line is consistent, at least. Regional security belongs to neighboring states, no outside interference. That's the same position behind rejecting the summit and charging its own transit fees at Hormuz. Tehran wants to be the toll operator, not a guest at Bahrain's table.
Right. The gap between what Iran signed on to in Doha and what the U.S. is actually doing in the Gulf now comes with a guest list and a host country.
From The Independent.
Fears are growing for a British couple detained in Iran who have not eaten in nearly 2 months after their contact with family was cut off. Craig and Lindsay Foreman, both 53, have been on hunger strike for 55 and 46 days respectively in protest at their treatment inside Iran's notorious Evin prison.
Craig and Lindsay Foreman are both 53. They've gone 55 and 46 days without food inside Evin prison, per The Independent, and now their contact with family has been cut off. UN human rights experts are calling the hunger strike a medical emergency.
And this is the same week we heard Arakchi in Geneva talking guiding principles. 2 British nationals starving in an Iranian jail. If hostage files are anywhere near that negotiating table, where's the movement?
That's the tension I want to keep straight. Tehran is signaling flexibility on the nuclear track while holding these two on 10-year espionage charges they deny. Arrested 18 months ago on a motorbike tour. Same government, same credibility problem.
Their son, Joe Bennett, told The Independent his biggest concern is time. Every day brings them closer to organ damage. And the family's now drafting a letter begging them to stop. That's how bad it's gotten.
We want this briefing to be useful and accurate. Send feedback, story ideas, or corrections anytime to Iran War Daily at lanternpodcasts.com. Next, we're watching Iran's final burial ceremony for Khamenei, expected in Mashhad on July 9. The next U.S.-Iran technical-level talks are expected on July 11, with Islamabad the most likely venue. And a U.S. official says Iran will offer detailed proposals in the next 2 weeks to narrow gaps in the nuclear talks. Links to all the stories we covered are in the show notes if you want to read further. That's Iran War Daily for today. This is a Lantern podcast.